common or soft rush. So we're not talking today about all the other species of rushes that have a huge role to play in biodiversity conservation type environment. It's just a common rush, that a kind of stubborn plant that keeps popping up basically where you don't want it. So basically on those, what my presentation is really focusing on is the more of the in-by type land and the better quality land, rather than a improving hill ground, which is a lot more contentious subject and certainly something we need to certainly take advice on from numerous places before we go about doing that. So that's my caveat to start with. What I would open with is this is an extract from the BBC Plant Finder website, which is I suppose it's a starter for 10 for a lot of horticulturalists or want to be horticulturalists, and it's a place you can go and look at different plants and look at options for your garden. And you can actually go and buy rush plants, which I think is amazing that somebody somewhere is making lots of money out of this by selling rushes. But when you look at what the instructions from the BBC level are, it's suitable for beginners. I think we knew that. It doesn't take a lot of skill to grow, but it's hardy. It likes acidic, moist and boggy soils. And basically it'll grow anywhere. And if you want to go and sow some rushes, do it between February and May. And if you want to divide them, do it between October and March. So that's a good thing to know, but basically tongue-in-cheek. But what that website's telling us is that we've got a wide growing medium. They will survive. They'll thrive in many environments. So they're a real challenge. And a further challenge for them is that dormancy. So they'll lie dormant in the soil for up to 60 years. Well, actually, there's evidence that they'll lie for an awful lot longer than that. So if you think about a topping regime, so normally you would, if you top other weeds, you would hope to suppress the seed bank and control them and control them that way. But if there's a bank of 60 years or more lying in the soil, no matter how much topping you're going to do, you're still going to have a seed bank there that can 60 years ago seeds can still come and cause you a problem at the moment. So, and the other thing is each seed head. So on a big rush bush, you'll have perhaps hundreds of seed heads, but each one of those seed heads can give you 8,500 seeds per year. So there's a serious amount of seeds down there in our ground. And what I suppose key factors causing rushes would be low pH, which is an issue across the whole country, or certainly most of Scotland has a pH issue. In the past, that was made worse by acid rain. Apparently, that's getting less, but certainly it's not. Inherently, most of our soils want to have a low pH, which restricts grass growth and encourages rush infestations. Poaching, overgrazing, restricting that grass growth and opening up the sward can cause a big, it increases your risk of developing rushes on your farm. Too much winter kill, which is basically, it depends again where you are in the country, but if you carry a lot of grass into the winter and then it's killed off by frost or by extreme weather, that again, opening up of the sward can create a bigger rush burden down the line. And interestingly, for dairy farmers or more intensive farmers in the south of Scotland, applying too much nitrogen or late slurry applications going into the ground. And poor grass growth in general, that's the main take-home message today is we can try and kill rushes all day long, but what we should be trying to do is growing more grass. So by improving that grass sward and growing more grass, we'll get more production out of it, but also the grass will actually outcompete or start to outcompete those rushes as well. And you'll see that again. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. The dairy analogy. So if you look at where a farm is converted from a beef farm into a dairy, you'll often see that those rushes being killed out naturally as things are fed better and there's more grass growing. As the nutrient status of the soil increases, the grass sward becomes stronger and the rushes become weaker. So that's what we're trying to do. I'm not suggesting we all go and convert crofts into dairy farms or anything, but if we can think about that, we're trying to grow more grass and encourage the grass to outcompete the rushes, is the theory. We don't. The counter argument to that, we don't want to create the environment where grass is struggling, and then that's when you see rushes coming in, and time again you see that happening when farms become less productive, the rushes start creeping in. And it needs to be an integrated approach. So we can't just go with one option to control them. Topping alone, spraying alone. We have to have a primary control and also a follow-up treatment. So other additional programs of treatment down the line as well. And finding out what's holding that grass back is really important. And I know Iain will talk about soil sampling later on. But as far as key principles of soil and grassland production, that we've got this pyramid of basically what's important or where your priorities should be. Now, drainage, I'm conscious, west coast of Scotland, it's drainage is a pretty challenging thing. High rainfall areas and heavy soils, drainage is a real challenge. But if your farm is poorly or croft is poorly drained, that should be the first priority. Is actually you'll get the most production out of sorting a lot of that drainage issue out. If there's a significant drainage problem, deal with that. Thereafter, look at compaction, look at soil structure, and try and alleviate any soil structure issue. Again, you'll get more production out of that ground organically if you improve the soil structure. And then we move on to pH, your next priority. So reducing the acidity of the soil. So by spreading lime or sand in many cases, we can reduce, or we can increase the pH, reduce the acidity, and make nutrients more available, and it's a better environment for growing grass, and therefore reducing rush burdens. After we've done the pH thing, we then look at phosphate and potash, and get their status up to that moderate minus kind of status. That the moderate status is where we want to be. And then teetering on the very top of the pyramid is nitrogen. So after we've got all of that sorted, we can then look at spreading nitrogen. And in many cases, we have that pyramid the wrong way round, that we spread nitrogen first, then we spread P and K, then we look at lime, then we look at soil structure, and then we look at drainage. And it's very hard because we've got, we're running a business here. We're not trying to control rushes, we're trying to make money. So it is a balancing act, and I'm conscious that redraining your whole croft isn't necessarily the best option, bang for buck, but the main principle is if the drainage is probably the thing that's holding things back the most. So certainly there's opportunity there. Acidity, just briefly, this was a SEPA project we did in Ayrshire, and this was looking at one whole catchment and looking at was actually looking at phosphate loading on the catchment, and within that we soil sampled every farm in the catchment, and these were pretty intensive, pretty well managed, well run, a good area. And what we found was that more than half of the soils that we sampled were below the target pH. So that the target pH would be about probably 5.8 for growing grass. And you can see that more than half of the field sampled were low in pH. And that really goes back to probably the 70s when we stopped getting support for spreading lime, and we waited to get support for spreading lime. But I suppose happily in the crofting areas there is grant assistance for liming, reseeding, and making improvements on that front. So do keep in mind pH, and I can't stress enough the importance of a regular soil sample. Now, the real reason I'm here tonight, apologies for waffling to start with, through the Farm Advisory Service a few years ago, I set up basically, I called it a trial, but it's certainly not a PhD study. It's a farmer-based trial with all the different options, or all the common options that farmers would tell us were good. We lined them up next to each other in a field. So this field was, in my lifetime, was a silage field, and it's now, it's wall to wall, or it's a decent crop of rushes on it. So a farmer was keen to address that situation, and we were certainly keen to have a look at all these different options and look at where the the best approach would be, or the most value for money would be. So this again, drainage wise, was reasonably well drained. There was a couple of burst drains that we sorted to start with, just to kind of level the playing field a wee bit. And what we did, we looked at, as I say, all the different options. So we topped one section. We had, as you can see here, we had strips that were 90 metres long and 8 metres wide. We topped one. We sprayed one with MCPA, which is a very traditional method, or old-fashioned method of chemical control. We topped one first, and then we sprayed it later on in the year. We flat lifted, so we subsoiled and dealt with the compaction issue and sprayed it with MCPA. In plot 5, we cut it and baled it, and in that year there was a lot of people using rushes as an alternative to straw for bedding, so we did that. And then we looked at weed wiping, so it's a contact weed control option, one using MCPA, which actually turns out was illegal, but that's sometimes how we roll. You sometimes make a wee mistake and don't read the label, but certainly take home message here is MCPA through a weed wiper isn't on, it's not available on license, so we can't do that. And then the next two, actually, we had a further plot. We had one using a glyphosate, which in this case was Roundup, and plot 8 was an afterthought, which was using Kyleo, which is a blended product of glyphosate and MCPA. So we set up all these plots next to each other and basically sat back and watched what happened. At the same time as doing it, we also did sub-treatments across the plots. So we did nothing to the top. In the middle section, we applied lime and phosphate, and on the bottom section, we applied slurry. And it was beef slurry, so it's effectively, similar to farmyard manure to the bottom section. And basically, the results, I don't have time, sadly, to present all the results, but what we found was, when we went back the next year, the plots that we just topped, so the very first plot, which was only topped, looked pretty much the same as what it did before. So the control was next to it. The control was actually the whole rest of the field. And it was very hard to see where we had topped because it didn't have that big an impact on rush populations at all. The spraying was actually the best option, or the most economical option. However, it does come with a big environmental warning. I suppose MCPA it's a pretty toxic chemical, and it's very it travels into watercourses very easily. So it's used properly, it's absolutely fine, but we need to be cautious, and we need to obey buffer zones, and actually probably double your buffer zones and just make sure we're absolutely right, because it's a very valuable product that we don't want to lose from the industry. But in the wrong hands, it's justifiably would be taken off us. The next one we topped and sprayed, and it actually looked very much the same as plot 2. So on paper it looked like the best idea, but actually in practice topping it was probably another cost, and it's not a big cost, it wasn't a massive cost, and it gave us a nice green crop to spray. But what we did notice, or what we did note, was really, if we're working in an environment that's got very limited time that we can get on, so if you're in a wet area, quite a short growing season, topping first and then spraying is possibly not your best option. We might be better on that day. You can travel earlier on in the season. You're probably better off just going straight on and spraying. But that's my personal opinion, and I'd be happy to discuss that later on. Flat lifting and spraying, there wasn't a massive compaction issue in this field, so there wasn't a noticeable difference in that one, but certainly sorting compaction is an important thing to do. Cutting and baling, we got a couple of bales of really rubbish bedding, certainly compared to straw, useful in some cases. We got a few bales, a big cost, and no impact on the rush population. And my fear with the cutting and baling is that we move the rushes from the rushy area that we cut and take those seeds and spread them all onto a good silage ground further down the farm. So I'm not a big fan of that one. Again, happy to discuss. And then we moved on to the 3 weed wipe options, which were weed wipe with MCPA, which was a poor result, weed wipe with Roundup, which was a pretty good result, and weed wipe with Kyleo, which was a similar result. So those two, the weed wiper we'll look at in a wee bit more detail in a minute, is a good option, and it puts the chemical only onto what you want to kill. So it only kills what you touch. It doesn't spray down into that sward. So it's a more sensitive way of getting chemical onto the crop. But we costed it. So the guy, our host farmer is a a agricultural contractor. In fact, he's my agricultural contractor, so I did feel if I had given him enough money through the year, I could justify giving him a bit of hassle. So that was quite good. But what we did was a few dummy invoices just to look at what the costs of these different plots would be on a per acre basis. Again, Farm Advisory Service, we should probably have done it in hectares, but that's how we roll. We did it in acres. So topping, we reckon, would be about £12 an acre. Obviously, it would vary on the density and the amount of diesel and time used, but roughly speaking, for an average crop would be about £12 an acre. Spraying with MCPA, including the chemical, was £14 per acre, so slightly dearer, but with a much bigger impact on that long-term population. Subsoiling and spraying came to £38 an acre, and again didn't have that big an impact in this case. Cutting and baling came to £35 an acre, so an expensive job, and the end result, again, we'll discuss that down the line if there's time. Then weed wiping, £10 to £15 an acre, assuming Roundup applied about 20 to 1. Lime to us here is just over £30 a tonne. I know that varies all over the place, and I know many crofting communities have got sand available and things, so that the price is variable, but certainly almost always a really good bang for your buck there to get some more grass growth. And what we saw on those plots, again, if you look across that middle section, there's a noticeable greening and better quality sward throughout that, which is really just showing that lime and phosphate was money well spent. So we'll not go into too much detail here. Actually, we've seen toppers before. This was the contact options. This is the weed wiper, and the guy that actually did it for us is a neighbour of mine as well, who actually invented the Logic weed wiper. So again, he was more than happy to help. And as you can see, so what we've got there is a spray tank on the back of the quad, or a small tractor, or whatever else you can pull it with, battery powered, and then when you pull it along, the spray nozzles inside the red hood on the top, which spray onto the carpet, and then the carpet brushes over the top of those rushes, and only the chemical only touches the plant that you're actually trying to kill. So the good thing, what you do before that, is graze it down fairly hard and get your good grasses out of the way of the chemical, and then you've got a good clean slate to start with. There is sometimes a wee bit friendly fire when you're starting the thing off, when you're just getting it going. There can be a few dribbles and things, a wee bit of a collateral damage, I suppose it is. But once you get your head around it, once you realise how the machine works and what you're trying to do, it's a good option. And importantly, it's a very sensitive option certainly for flora, so for different plants, different species down there in the sward. You're not killing all your clovers out, you're not killing your plantains and things that you want in that sward. So a good option. And as I say, the two options we use were MCPA and glyphosate plus the blended product, but it is a glyphosate only machine. And I think that, again, the message would be the MCPA through the weed wiper didn't really work. We obviously didn't get enough chemical onto those plants, and actually the glyphosate option was a lot better. So if you're tempted to use a weed wiper, I would encourage you to use a glyphosate product. Other things that we can look, we spoke about, we didn't do, but there's deep ploughing is an option to plough those seeds right down. Mixed results there, and also depending on where you are, do you have 35 centimetres of soil to plough down? Obviously a very expensive job too. Over sowing, so sowing more competitive grass species into the sward, to me it's an option in that it's something you can do, but I don't think that's a good option for really trying to control rushes on your farm or croft. I think there's better options there that I've got more. Again, you'll get more for your money. A full reseed's a good option, but again, you have to make sure that soil's in perfect condition, pH is right, P and K is right, and everything's sitting just ready to go, so that those seeds hit the ground. They hit the ground running and would outcompete any young rush seeds that get going as well. And then again, another thing to consider in looking at where we are is, biodiversity wise, we need to watch that we're not trying to create a totally green, lush landscape. And I know that's wishful thinking in some cases, but the biodiversity end of things, conservation end of things, is hugely important at the moment. And politically, it's a bargaining tool that we've got, that actually that biodiversity conservation value is important. We need to keep that in mind before we try and obliterate every rush on the place. But really, just to leave my presentation section here. So this is not far from me at home. This was a farm, a good dairy farm. The family in it were, this was their final year. Their tenancy had come up, and the estate was taking it back in hand. So this was in, I think, 2002. No, 2003, I think it was. Anyway, it won't matter. 2003, it looked like this. That's a good crop of second cut silage. Things going pretty well. And 2 years ago, it looked like this. So within say 15 years, we reverted from pretty good arable type ground, decent grass growing land, into something that is really hill land, looking very much like something you would want to plant with trees. So that's really the reason we want to. This is the areas I'm talking about, is the good stuff on your farm or croft, the better end of things. Let's try and do something to make sure we can keep them green and avoid too much of this. So that pretty much concludes my presentation, but certainly happy to take questions or discuss anything later on.
Okay, that's lovely. We'll come back to questions at the end. I should have said that. I've just put it in the chat. So thank you very much for that, Robert. We're now heading to my section of the presentation. If I can, hopefully you can all hear me. Yeah. Okay, that's super. Somebody's made me presenter. That's good. From the beginning. I want to leave plenty of time for questions, really. I should have said at the beginning as well that the event tonight's a farm advisory service funded by Scottish Government, and we really appreciate that. It's not what we would like to do. Love to be in a field or a shed. That's my preferred way, but we're all learning new skills at the moment. So hopefully you will get as much as you can out of this, and you will get a copy of the presentation at the end. We'll present the PDF after this one in the next few days. So I'm just going to skip along past that one. Now, I'm going to talk about crofting grants and the likes of that, because that's really a lot of the work that we do here is giving advice on how people would deal with the aspects of having rushes and improving the ground and livestock and all the elements of like drainage and that. And obviously it's costly. It's maybe more costly in rural areas, that's for sure. And other things that are difficult to say, access to contractors, and people who can spray for you, or the equipment of any large scale. So Robert's touched on a lot of that. It's no different whether you're on a farm, or a farming area, and you're on a crofting area, but maybe the terrain and the topography where we are, if we get any more rain like we have at the moment, I mean, my ground is absolutely saturated. You know, as we were saying, drainage needs to be sorted. Maybe we need to have to look out for like compaction or breaking the ground too much, maybe moving stock regularly so that they're not feeding, particularly cattle. Cattle make quite a mess on ground and can cause problems and breaking the ground. So, you know, we have to look at these things and see how we can deal with them. So if you're in a crofting area, you can, if you are a tenanted crofter, access grant funding. You do need to set yourself up with the Scottish Government Rural Development Department, but that doesn't take long to take place if you haven't got that. But you need to be a tenanted crofter or owner-occupier, or be a subtenant of a croft. You can be a subtenant in that you have the use of that ground for a period, and that you've applied through the Crofting Commission to do that. So I'll just touch briefly, because now some of you may well know all the detail here, but you do need to have an agricultural activity, whether it's livestock based or it's going to be that you're going to produce, say, grass off the croft and sell that. You need to have some agricultural activity that will make you be able to apply for these grants. So if you're an individual crofter, you can get up to 25,000. I can't go into the detail of this. I don't want to go into the detail of how you get 60 or 80%. But if you're under 41, and in the first 5 years of the tenancy of your croft, you can get 80%, and everybody else gets 60. If you're on a common grazing, you can get up to 125,000, which is just amazing, and 80% of the grant. So it's quite incredible, the funding that's out there, particularly for common grazing. So if you want to improve the village park, I see so many village parks that are quite rush infested. There is huge opportunities to maybe take the approaches that Robert has recommended before. So never undertake, it's the same for any grant funding. Don't do anything before you've applied for the grant, because you're just rule out you getting any of that grant. You have to apply for the grant and follow the requirements of that. I put a link in I think it's the next slide, on rural payments, where you can go and read the guidance. I wouldn't say bedtime reading, but maybe when you've got a minute when you can concentrate on it to go through just the guidance here, that would be quite a useful thing to do. So 2 competitive quotations for the work if you're going to bring in a contractor and you're going to source some materials. But if the cost of that is going to be over £10,000, you have to get 3 quotes. But that's where possible. Where, like here, we can only access, well, we don't have lime on the island, so we'd have to import it. And there are some people some of the contractors who go to the mainland with lorries and come back empty. They'll take it over on the ferry, for instance, here. But you may be nearer a source of lime. Here, we have access to a lot of sand, and that gives us our lime option. So, but we only have 2 suppliers and 2 areas that we can take them from in the island. So you would never be able to get 3 competitive quotes. You can also cover the elements like if you're going to do the work yourself and you have your own equipment, you can do the plowing, the harrowing, the reseeding. So if you're multi-talented and able to do these things, you can get a labour rate and a machine rate for the equipment that you're going to use. And that's calculated by the department when you apply in the form. So I would recommend taking advice on that. If you don't know the nitty-gritty of it, seek advice, say, from the likes of SAC, or speak to somebody at the Department of Agriculture. Now, soil sampling. As Robert emphasised, you have to know what you've got. There's no use coming to the game after the event, applying loads of lime or assuming that you have to do that. These things, they're expensive. Fertilizer is expensive. So what nutrients, what P, what K you need to apply, what nitrogen you need to apply, you've got to know what you've got to work with. It's the same if you were involved with horticulture and that as well. If you know whatever you're growing, it's good to know what you have in the ground. And for the cost of a soil sample's what, about £40–50, but it's well worth that. And it's one of the things that if you outlay for that for grant, you can actually recover that. It's one of the things you can put down on your costs, but you have to incur that cost beforehand in order to be able to apply for the grant. Now, don't come to me or anybody else with a bag. I asked somebody for a soil sample on the weekend, and I got half a bag of Harborough, yellow bag Harborough of soil at my door this morning in the office. And I was only looking for just under a bag of sugar's worth. So yes, the rest is there. We'll be planting potatoes in the spring in the many Christmas boxes that I'm gathering there. So it does happen quite often, but that's the sort of amount that you would need to submit to an office to get sampled, or for someone to do a soil sample, so that they can give you a report. And it usually takes, within a week, you can have a sample analysed and a report returned to you. Okay, now I am going to go through all these, but I'm just making you ponder here as to things that you should maybe look at. Touching on a few of them, does the field require drainage? For myself and my own land, that's one of the things I decided this year. I just gave in the end. Drainage is not that expensive as an outlay, especially if you're getting grant. And if you've got a good contractor, it is well worth the effort. There's a lot of things that will improve on your holding. So then, do you need to remove it? Do all the rushes need to be removed? Do I need to cut them beforehand? Do I spray them beforehand? So I'm just throwing out here questions as reference. So you'll have a copy of this to come back to. Okay, so Mari in our office here, her husband does contract work on the side from the job he does. So they kindly sent us some pictures of some of the equipment they have and some of the jobs that they're doing there on the holdings around the district that they live in. So toppers, I'm just going to very quickly go through this, so I'll leave enough time for questions. But this is use of a topper on the ground. You've got to be very cautious on the type of ground you have, whether it's wet, to avoid compaction as well. So I'll be careful of the sort of size of tractor that comes onto the holding. Or maybe you could use other facilities like a quad. That's the other equipment as a quad might be a better preference for you to access areas. And then we've got the flail mower, and you can see the job that's doing as well on the ground. It's keeping it quite tight to the ground, and actually doing quite a clean job, as good as the topper really. But it's not a job you would do in really wet, boggy weather like we've got just now. Pick your moment, you know. And I think you've all got the common sense to realise when a contractor should come onto your ground and avoid getting bogged down on the areas that are access into areas that you really don't want them to be there. And then we've got this manual. Now, I've used this myself actually, and this works quite well. And a lot of like hire shops actually have these things now, which is like basically a manual flail mower. That's what it is. It's driven, so it moves forward, and you can move it around into tight areas. It's quite a good way on smaller, narrower crofts. Certainly here in Lewis, we see that a lot of the crofts are small and narrow, and access can be difficult for tractors to turn. So this may be an option for you as well to explore. I have to admit as well, I haven't got a picture of myself doing it, but on my croft, I bought a fairly decent strimmer, and I just, when I need an hour away from the kids, I go out with my strimmer and just do maybe half an hour, and clearing an area, just cutting it down. And it's therapy for me, but I certainly see improvements of that, and it allows me then to go on and spray after that. And then as we're talking about the weed wipers, so the caution with that, in that weed wipers, you shouldn't be spreading MCPA within that, so just to be careful about that. Now, we haven't really gone into any of the spraying. The spraying certificates are quite an expensive thing to get, so hopefully there are more now around, more contractors around who have the spraying certificate, or possibly an option that would be is encourage, say, the common grazing to maybe put some people through the training in order to get the spray certificate for someone in your area, because you know that then benefits much more people rather than one individual having that spray certificate. Is it going to move forward for me? There you go. So I'm just giving you a few examples here very quickly of just showing what the contractor went doing. The area of land looked like that before it was cut back. And then, as you can see, the job the flail mower was doing, and then what the result was in the end. Now, yes, it's all great cutting it, as Robert was saying, and it really has no effect if that's all you do. I have to say, it just comes back with a vengeance, really. So you really have to have a strategy. Are you spraying before? Are you cutting back and letting it grow? For myself personally, I seem to have better results when I cut it and let it grow back, maybe sort of up to 4 inches or so, and then I spray onto that. I graze hard before I spray, and then I'll spray and do the reseeding work that is necessary. Then we've got the topping, as you can see, quite dense rush cover here, and then areas of the crops were sprayed, and then that's the result after topping. So it's, you know, not everybody's croft is flat, so you have to think of, like as we were saying, the other tools that I was going on about there is maybe something you need to refer to as well. And in this croft here, what happened was the rushes began to, this was a newly reseeded, maybe in the last 5 years, and due to issues with the winters in particular, the last few years here, certainly here in Lewis, I'm sure it's the same everywhere else as well, have been very wet. And that encouraged the rushes to come back into the field, but with spraying and topping, the field was allowed to recover. So you can see quite good effect there, and quite a good result back on that field. So preparation is the key. Certainly, take a soil sample. It's necessary if you're going to apply for grants. You have to have done a soil sample and have a soil report, so that they have some way of gauging that you are following really the requirements, what's required for your soil. You've taken professional advice on that. Don't undertake any activity beforehand, and if you're unsure, seek advice. The likes of SEC or the department, with plenty of people there with good experience, you should be able to help you and point you in the right direction. So I hope you found that of some use. So now we will go to hopefully a question and answer session. I'm seeing quite a number of questions coming through here just now, Robert. So I'm trying to get rid of my presentation if I can. Hold on. I'll minimize that. Okay. Sorry about that. If it lets me. Oh, everything's very slow tonight. Sorry about this. Okay, I can still see the questions though. So can you hear me, Robert? Are you there for?
Yes, I can hear you. Ready to go.
So I've got a few questions here. I'll pop to you. How long do animals need to be excluded after treating the field with weed wipes?
Interesting question. So it depends, I suppose, is the answer. What are the stock? What was the density of the rushes to start with? Technically, I think you could say they don't need to be excluded because you're only spraying something that they probably don't eat. But I would always be a bit cautious and say probably a couple of weeks would probably give you that. You'd be really pretty safe, particularly after using glyphosate. A couple of weeks would be more than ample to cover you for that. Okay,
yeah. But it does depend on the product. The product would recommend that, whatever you're putting on, I would imagine.
Yeah. And actually, the product really, what we said earlier about putting MCPA through a weed wiper isn't allowed. It's also rubbish. So actually, the thing to keep in your mind is it doesn't work rather than it's not allowed. So not that I'm condoning doing things that aren't allowed, but keep in mind that basically glyphosate's the product to go with at this stage.
Yeah. Is there a better time of year to undertake rush activity?
Well, it's interesting. The common advice is that you should wait until they've headed. Yeah. And I totally disagree with that, in that a rush is no different to any other plant, that when it's growing trying to reproduce. So it's growing vegetatively and then it goes to head. And when it does that, it totally changes the way it grows. Its growth rate dramatically reduces, and it puts all its energy into reproducing rather than growing. And killing a growing thing's always easier than killing something that's headed. So for me, I would be aiming for that May, June, pre-Highland show time, while things are green and growing. And it gives you the benefit that doing it then, you get some added production within the year. Whereas if you do it in September, you kill them off and leave it pretty open for the full winter. So actually, if you can kill them earlier in the season, you can grow more grass, you can get more competition in that sward. So stop. Because quite often what happens is you'll kill the rushes that are there, leave it open through the winter, and then new rushes will grow for next year. So actually, if we can grow a better sward of grass, a tighter knit sward of grass through the year, you're in a better place.
Yeah. Somebody's asking here, it seems we only have success using chemicals. Are there any other strategies? Or is it really?
Yeah, there's so the chemical, I suppose it's like anything in farming. We've got very addicted to chemicals. We've got hooked on them, and it's always been the easy option. So we can absolutely make progress without chemical. So you can top, so the thing, topping alone isn't going to do it. But if we can top and we can apply more lime and we can get that grass sward improving, a regular topping strategy will start to put pressure on that rush population. And another thing worth doing, very expensive way of doing it, but if you are organic or want to be organic, topping twice a year is quite a good option too. So your first top takes the old stuff away, and the second one really puts pressure on that plant and makes it harder, and it'll also toughen up the grass that's there too. So there's a lot of good I could probably talk for another 2 days on organic rust control options. Economic rust control options start with chemicals, but there's definitely sustainable, potentially better, holistic approaches down the line too.
Yeah. What about compaction? Because I think you do really need to, if your ground's compacted, you see a lot of waterlogging, don't you? On ground. You see a lot of yellowing of grass as well. It's firm to the foot. Certainly when it's drier weather, you'll see firm to the foot. Is that not the case? How can you go about reducing that?
So first of all, the thing to do, compaction is a really expensive issue, regardless whether you've got it or not. So if you've got compaction, it's costing you money. And if you don't have compaction but you go subsoiling, it then costs you a lot of money to deal with a problem that's not there. So the first thing I would do with any soil is go and dig a hole. Go and find out, have you got a compaction issue? And sometimes it can be hard to tell, but very often it's really easy to tell that there's an obvious point where that soil shears off. So it's really, is the structure, is it blocky, is it hard, or is it all crumbly and loose? If it's all crumbly and loose, everything's good. But the reality of where I'm sure most of the audience are, and where I'm sitting just now, we've got high rainfall area and heavy soils, livestock and tractors. So we're going to have some compaction issue in most areas. So yeah, addressing that as best you can is really, it's money for old rope really. So how can we do that? We can, subsoiling would be the traditional option. So that's pulling probably a single leg through the soil and bursting up that pan. We can also use spikers, grasslands, sward lifters, all types of different tools to do it. The other thing you can do is actually, simply just ploughing it. It's a good option too. Is actually a reseed can be a good way of ploughing that compaction back out. And now more and more we're seeing people planting different crops, different plants. To rather than just having a ryegrass sward, we would put a more diverse range of plants in there that have got deeper roots, and actually get the plant to do it rather than metal, because metal through soil costs money.
Yeah. Now,
but again, it depends where you are and what you've got available to you as far as contractors are concerned. We're lucky down here. I could get most machines on farm pretty quickly, but if you're in a remote rural area, it can be more challenging. So really, identifying if you've got a problem first would be my priority, and then planning after that to see if we can do something better with it.
Now, if you do a reseed and there's a recurrence of rush, it may not be over the field, would you not have to be fairly cautious if you've put on a clover mix? The clover will be susceptible, won't it, to the chemical? Yeah. Anything you can do in that situation?
Again, for me, the reseed should be the option you go to once everything else is correct. So the question I suppose to start with is, why are we reseeding? And in some cases, and totally legitimately, you might be reseeding because you can get a grant to reseed. That's good. But the money we could spend, you could spread more lime across more area and deal with pH across the whole productive area of your croft. You could, are we trying to make a very small area of your farm or croft productive, or are you trying to make the whole of your in-buy area more productive? So I think if you've done a reseed and there's rushes coming back into it, it's happened to us all. We've done it. It happens everywhere, but something's not gone to plan within that reseed. And to me, the reseed probably is too far up the list of priorities of things we want to do, that we actually probably want to get drainage, compaction, liming, all of those things sorted first. Yeah. And actually, in a lot of cases, for more marginal areas, you can do an awful lot by working with the plants you've got there already. And I know our research farm at Kirkton, which is there's been a lot of good work done there, and actually well worth a look. Very relevant to crofting areas. It's a huge hill farm, but it's a very challenged environment. It's a high rainfall area and high up. The did a trial looking at whether it actually paid to reseed, and their answer was probably paid to reseed, but hard to really put your finger on that it gained you so much money because it's a marginal area. They'd be better improving, making more improvements to a bigger area to get more grazing potential out of it.
And lime is not a quick fix. I mean, some of the pHs I see in soils, my heart drops when I see a pH quite a bit below 5 even, and I go, oh, right. It's not quick fix. You've got to really go at it for some time before, and regular treatments, and then once maybe 2 years down the line, then soil sample again, see where you're at. Regular soil sampling is just as important as anything else. To see that it doesn't improve, you're not letting it slip. Really, it's not the case.
Yeah, the lowest pH I've ever seen was on it was a bit of a unique situation, but it was a pH 4, and it was a small area of Sitka spruce that had been felled, and obviously Sitka sheds its needles and makes an acidic environment, kills everything else off, so only it can grow. Yeah. And the guy had been felled. I think it was a couple of acres. He had felled it, grubbed out, spent ages grubbing out all these stumps, did a great job, levelled it all off, gathered all the roots, gathered all the stones, lovely reseed, and it was a perfect. There was not a single blade of ryegrass in that field. It was wall to wall, tiny green, beautiful green rushes. Just perfect. Okay. And they basically had wasted so much money in the reseed, and what he should have been doing was liming. And actually, naturally, that soil would rise itself a wee bit, but it would only come to that maybe about 5. So he was needing to put a lot of lime onto that soil to get things right. But it's not a quick fix. But equally, nitrogen is only a quick fix. So nitrogen's just a green paintbrush that you can spread a bit of nitrogen. It tidies it up for it makes the grass grow for a few weeks. But it's not an option. It's not a good option if everything else is wrong. Nitrogen doesn't make it right.
Yeah. I see that quite often when folk go in and they haven't taken time to I go back to taking a soil sample, and they said, "Oh, I've done this and I've done that," and you go, on what basis then? And then you see the ground. It looks amazing at the start, and then within like 6 months or even the following spring, you're going, "Woof, what's happened here?" And the grass just can't. It has nothing to grow, to feed itself with. Really, there's nothing there. It's underneath.
There's also interesting stuff now about what we're putting in those sward mixes as well. So if you are reseeding, are we it's worth taking time to speak to the right people and see if what's in the grass mix fits with a Lewis environment, or wherever you are. Perhaps that really high yielding, late heading ryegrass isn't the right answer. Maybe a more traditional mix, a more organic, a more diverse mix is more suitable for your environment. So I would certainly, your soil sample, getting all that stuff right is super important. And if we get to the stage of reseeding, I would be taking a big step back and looking hard at what's likely to have a bit of longevity on your system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and these seed suppliers are really open to you having a conversation with you.
Well, if you don't have the conversation with them and don't put the order in, they don't have a job. So
yeah.
I would be happy to challenge them and discuss it with them.
Yeah. Just a couple of questions to go. Any thoughts on topping before a period of hard frost?
It's interesting. We got this question a few weeks ago as well. So yes, I think it will do something to the rushes. What it also does to the grass, I'm not sure. So we've got to watch. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So we want to make sure that grass is in a position to really survive and thrive. So yes, I think frost is a tool. The challenge again is, can we get on? Because if compaction's not our friend, do we want to be dancing about in a wet field trying to top rushes before the frost? I don't know. I think there's a role for it. I don't think it's maybe the best option, but I think it's something that, if we're looking chemical free and looking, it can't do a great deal of harm, and it may do some good.
Yeah. Somebody's got a question here on taking bales from a rush park and then feeding that somewhere else, say to cattle, is transference an issue there?
Yeah.
The
To me,
around,
I think it's a big issue, and if I put it in my context, so we don't make silage on our poorest land, we make it on our best land, and the rushes thankfully are all on the poorest land. If we go and cut the ground that's the poorest land at midsummer time, when you can make some decent hay type stuff out of those rushes, you haul all the seeds back in. And where do we spread all our dung? We spread it all on our best ground to grow silage. So I would be really worried that we're topping up a seed bank that I don't want to have any more seeds in it.
Yeah.
You know, zero would be, one seed would be too many, and we're never going to get there. So it has a role, and for me to say bluntly, nobody should do it. It has a role. You just have to be really cautious that what you're doing going to achieve what you're trying to achieve, or is there something else going to cause? Is there an unknown consequence of it?
Okay.
But yeah, it's the other thing, I suppose, bedding wise, rushes are pretty shiny, it's not the best bedding under the sun either. It does a job, serves a purpose, but it's not. I don't know if there's enough bedding value in it to justify the cost of going through that, cutting, baling, all that work. I think there's better options, but that's personal opinion.
Someone's asked here, has anybody used rushes for using as biomass for energy production?
There's a few folk trying it. I have tried it, and certainly it would be a really sensible job, but sadly I think there's more energy in a bale of straw than there is in a bale of rushes. So they're actually burning straw instead of burning rushes. So we are using rushes to bed and they're burning straw. So it's all out of kilter, but certainly if we're looking at biomass, looking at, there is a future for these upland areas, and bracken's been used quite successfully, I think. So, bracken, gorse, rushes, maybe not all bad. The future, there's maybe, I'm not saying we'll all make loads of money by selling it to BBC Plant Finder, but it's perhaps there's an option for it down the line.
Okay then, folks. I think we'll conclude that. I think we've made up a little bit of the time that we lost at the beginning. So hopefully with a connection, we've managed to make up some time, giving you some good information. You will get a copy of the PDF for this meeting, as I say, within the next few days. You'll have a survey to fill in as well. If you could fill that in, that's really important to us, and it helps with promoting this back to the success of this meeting to Scottish Government. I hope you've enjoyed the night. As I say, there's lots of information there, but do not be afraid to come back to us if you've got other questions. We're more than happy to come back. I have to thank Robert for his input tonight, and it's a very interesting talk. And all I can say is good night to you all, and have a very good Christmas if I don't see any of you at any more of our meetings. Okay, good night.
Thank you all.